Okay, now's probably not the time to try and figure out if I've remembered everything, but hopefully I have. We're live. Welcome everyone who is currently watching and anyone watching the replay as well. What have I called this? Masking and unmasking, I think, is our topic for today's live Q&A. So hello to everyone who's already here and already chatting in the comments. So welcome Jess and Sally and Heather and Mark and others. So like I said, today is a Q&A specifically on the topic of masking and unmasking. So have a think if there's something you'd like to ask. And otherwise, I'll start with a brief intro and then we can go from there. So the biggest question that I always get asked at the end of any presentation or public speaking event or anything like that when I'm talking about masking is what's the difference between masking and just being polite, being social, doing what you're expected to do in a social setting? And that's a really good question, because to some extent, not masking at all, not modifying your appearance or your behavior at all when you're in the presence of others is a problem socially, right? When I go to work, I have to behave professionally. When I am in another situation, there's usually some kind of etiquette to be followed. So what's the difference between following appropriate social etiquette and masking? And probably the biggest difference is how habitually you do it and how authentic it is to your personality and your yourself, your character as an individual human being. So I wish I brought my little Rubik's Cube here, because that's my perfect analogy of this, is that we all have different sides. And if I'm bringing one side of myself to a situation, then that's an authentic representation of myself. If I'm wearing a mask, try not to hide my mouth, otherwise you have trouble hearing me. If I'm wearing a mask, it's not actually me. It's like a performance, like an actor taking on a character that's not like they're doing a really good job of being in character, but it's not actually their own true personality. And if you're doing this too often, then what happens is a psychological term called compartmentalization. And I only just realized this much, much later in life. But what that looks like is no one at my work knows that I have kids, or no one in my friendship group, in this particular friendship group, knows that I like all the things that this other friendship group knows, right? So I'm a different person at D&D, and I'm a different person at rock climbing, and I'm a different person with my university friends, because I've compartmentalized myself into what's appropriate to share here and what's appropriate to share here. And that way they're a little bit disconnected from each other. So that's one of the ways that you can tell the difference between what's appropriate in terms of just normal social stuff that everyone does versus what's masking, is how authentic does it feel to you? Like, are you actually expressing yourself, or are you hiding yourself and trying to fit in with what you think someone else is doing? And the other one is, how pervasive is the mask in your whole life? If I go home to my family and I don't take off the mask I was wearing at work, that's a problem. If I have a group of friends and I'm masking with my closest friends, that's a problem. And what I've noticed talking to lots of people in the autistic community is that it's so easy to be unconsciously masking a significant amount of the time. I was talking to a friend recently who was saying his rejection sensitivity meant that he was too scared to be too different. I have to fit in. I have to be more similar to everyone else around me because I'm scared of being rejected. So there's some really common experiences. I could go on, but I want to make this live as interactive as possible. So I'll check the chat in a minute to see if there's any questions. I'm not always that good at noticing chat stuff while I'm doing one thing at a time. So if I miss a question that you think you'd like me to cover, then feel free to post it again so it comes up as the most recent one. This is why in real life we don't always finish sentences, because I probably didn't need to finish that sentence. You probably already understood what I'm trying to say. So welcome everyone. Lots of people saying hello, lots of people sharing where they're dialing in from today, or watching from today, which is fantastic. So pop a question if you have a question on masking or unmasking in the comments, and I'll take a look at that if you like. Otherwise, I will just keep talking about whatever first comes to mind on this topic. And so something else. Oh, actually, we do have a question. It's not a question for me though. It's a question for you. We just had a quick social catch up with our Patreon group, and a question was asked: do other people have a masking threshold? Like, I can mask for 2 hours and then that's it. Or I can mask for 20 minutes and then that's it. And then it kind of breaks down and then I really have to leave because it takes so much effort and energy. So one question for you all that you can answer in the chat is, do you have a masking threshold? Like how does it work? Like, can you just keep masking? Do you mask so unconsciously that it's just all the time? Or yeah, do you need to take a break? Okay, so I'll leave that for you to ask. So now taking a look at the chat, this is one question that I think makes sense with my scanning of the question. Have you, meaning me, I assume, memorized social scripts as politeness? Basically, is being polite a type of script? Good question. This relates similarly to what I was saying before about the difference between being polite and following etiquette versus masking. Sometimes social scripts are just expected, right? When someone says hello, you say hello. When someone says, how are you? You say, I'm fine. It's just most of the time, the thing to do. When someone, you say happy birthday, you say congratulations, you say condolences for something, if that's the appropriate thing to say. So sometimes there are social scripts and you just have to say the thing. And for me personally, this was really tough. One example for me is when I was younger, my parents would organize play dates and they would insist that I would say, thank you for having me. And the visceral reaction that my body would resist saying those words, it's like, yeah, but you've just told me to say it and now I'm going to say it? Like, that just doesn't feel authentic. But sometimes there are just social scripts that we need to follow. The difference is, am I maintaining connection with those social scripts, or am I just reciting something that I've prepared earlier and my heart is not actually in it? It's not actually expressing what I mean it to express. So a good example of this is using a, what's the word for it? An idiom of some sort, right? It's a pre-prepared social expression that is usually a bit weird and doesn't quite mean literally what it's supposed to mean, but people use it to express themselves. So if I use an idiom, a pre-prepared, script of a little nugget of something that I can share, then if I'm using it in a way to express myself, great. If I'm using it because that's what I think I'm supposed to say and I don't really mean it, then that makes a big difference. Anyway, there was also another question. I don't quite understand this question yet. Let me read it out properly. One of my special interests is politics, and I'm a passionate advocate. People are hyper aware not to offend, but democracy is very important. What are your thoughts? My first thought is, how do I relate this to masking and unmasking? How I'm going to relate this to masking and unmasking is a big reason for masking psychologically is I don't want to stand out. I don't want to offend people. I don't want to do anything that might be risky, that might have a negative social impact on me. So people who are very good at politics, very good at diplomacy, there is an element of being polite, like we were talking about before, but there's also, just as importantly, an element of navigating that situation and being authentic and bringing yourself into the situation. You can imagine like two diplomats, they look like hands for some reason, right? Discussing something. Yes, you want to be polite and listen to what the other person has to say, but at the same time, you have to communicate what your country needs in the negotiation. So there's an element of politeness that kind of lubricates the wheels of social stuff going on, but bringing your authentic self into the mix significantly is what we're trying to do here. And the other, sorry, I just noticed this comment, which I have to share because it's exactly what I was about to say. The other important thing to recognize is, how do I do that without it being so exhausting that it leads to burnout? If you're masking all the time with your friends, with your family, at work, at home, all the time, it can be extremely exhausting. And the end result of that long term is burnout, which unfortunately a lot of us have experienced due to how common it is to feel like we need to mask in lots of situations. Okay, let's keep going. I'll see if I can find another question or comment that I would like to share. This is a nice answer to the previous question. Do I have a threshold? Well, it kind of depends how overwhelming the situation is. And that is relevant to masking in a very interesting way. We can kind of talk about masking in a binary, masking, unmasking. I encourage people to think about masking as a linear scale. How much am I masking in this situation? Can I mask slightly less in this situation? As we've gone through, sometimes masking or similar behavior has a social utility to it. Like, there's a reason we do it. It's because it's actually helpful to some degree. It also has downsides, but it also has some things that are helpful. So what that means is unmasking, completely taking the mask off, going from 100% to 0 is usually not a good idea, because you might remove the downsides, but you also lose all that social utility. You create lots of friction. Suddenly there's a huge jump in, you were this person 1 minute and now you've dropped the mask and now you're acting completely differently. And that can put a huge strain on relationships and tension and conflict in situations and things like that. So there are lots of downsides to taking off the mask, which is one of the reasons that I believe we shouldn't talk about it too trivially. Hopefully that makes sense. It's important to learn how to unmask. It's very helpful to learn how to be more authentic and mask less. but suggesting that we should all just take off the mask all the time sort of oversimplifies the process a bit. So instead, what if we could slowly learn to mask less? Right? We've got the status quo. This is a really common coaching strategy, by the way. How do I make the situation just a tiny, tiny, tiny little bit better? Right? It's not going to be 100% better. I can't fix the problem. The problem's too big to be fixed. But what I can do is take it down from 100% to 90%. And then maybe next week I can take it from 90% to 85%. And then if we constantly make sort of slow improvements on that, then it will eventually over time make a pretty big difference. So that's how I like to frame it. How can I mask slightly less? Which means, going back to the comment that was shared earlier, which means my threshold increases slightly more every time. Instead of being able to stay 2 hours, I can stay 3 hours. Interestingly, I find it much, much easier to attend a social thing that lasts 24 hours, 48 hours, compared to a 2-hour social thing. It's just a lot less intense. It's a lot easier to take breaks. And the temptation to mask is a lot less when there's a much longer time frame. I've noticed that, at least for myself. Okay. So just looking at the comments again. Okay, great question from Samson. What's the difference between code switching and masking? So for those not familiar with the term code switching, I'm not an expert on it. My understanding of it is the term came about with regard to different cultures. So let's say you've got your family culture versus the mainstream culture, which means that you might act and speak one way at home, and then as soon as you leave the house, well, you have to obey completely different rules. And so what happens is those rules kind of get implanted in your brain just like a different language. It's almost like I speak to my parents in their native language, and then I go out and then I speak English to everyone else, and it's like two separate languages that exist. So that's my understanding of sort of code switching. So what's the difference between that and masking? It has a huge impact because our personality is different depending on the situation. Those who speak multiple languages will notice that a person's personality can be quite different depending on what language they're speaking, which is really interesting. So in this case, how I mask at home might be different to how I mask around other people, or might be different to how I mask in a workplace. So I'll use my example of an engineering workplace, for example. If I am adopting a persona in that workplace of an attention to detail persona, a really dedicated, hardworking persona, I'm going to need a reason to not want to socialize in a neurotypical way. So maybe in that way, I always talk about interesting intellectual things that I know my engineering buddies are going to understand in that context. And because I'm always talking about that, I might not be bringing a significant part of myself that would be more appropriate in a different situation. So another way to think about the different ways of masking is sometimes overcompensating is a type of masking. So in a work setting, I might mask by overcompensating with my abilities in that space. So by drawing attention away from the parts of me I don't want you to see and drawing it to the parts of me I do want you to see. Here, focus on my work. Don't ask me complex social questions, that type of thing. So hopefully that's a little bit of an answer of how it can be relevant to code switching. The way I like to think about it is it's like adopting a character, like acting, and you might act differently depending on the situation that you're in, but it's still acting. Another really common way to mask is to essentially hide. Try not to get any attention. This is the opposite of overcompensating. Overcompensating is, hey, everyone, look at me, but don't look at like all of me. Just look at the bits of me that I want you to see. And the opposite of that is camouflaging, blending in, doing what everyone else is doing, trying to get as little attention to yourself as possible. So maybe at home, you're really extroverted and you like to talk about your special interests a lot. And then when you're out in public, you just don't say anything. Or maybe you have situational mutism and there's too much going on and you just, nope, I don't feel safe or confident enough to share my true self. So I'm just going to share nothing. And then everyone's going to know me as the guy who doesn't talk much. So lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different ways to mask in different settings. Okay. I have another question for you all in the chat. Who identifies as an introvert and who identifies as an extrovert? Because this can make a huge difference to masking and unmasking as well. Just like I was saying, with the just like, because someone want to remind me where that sentence was going. Just like I was saying, so some of you know my barrel of monkeys analogy with my words. Like I just keep pulling them, and if I pull them at the right speed, then they just keep pulling each other. I was saying, oh, that's right, overcompensating, and the other one, which I just told you, if this was a live audience, I'd literally ask the audience to tell me, what did I say 30 seconds ago? Overcompensating versus camouflaging. There we go. So you can kind of see that there's the high energy, extroverted way of putting on a persona. And so what unmasking would look like in that situation is I can still be extroverted, I can still be loud, I can still have lots of energy. So how is it different? Well, the difference is that I'm doing it because I feel like doing it rather than because I'm worried about what other people are going to think of me if I turn up to this situation authentically. So it's very, very easy to overcompensate and try harder to put on an appearance. And one of the ways that I've learned to notice when I'm doing that is by how much effort it feels like it's taking. Specifically, if I take a break and my whole body just relaxes, I'm like, oh, okay, I think I was like trying a little bit too hard then. And so my personal unmasking strategy to try and mask slightly less is to just try and relax. If I can be in a situation and relax at the same time, then that is going to be a less masked version of myself compared to a version of myself that is happy to expend energy just to be in the space. So I don't know if you can relate to that, but that's one of the strategies that I use. Okay, let's try this question from a mum. Do you have any general tips to stop masking when appropriate or mask less? And I remember you liking my puppy analogy from the love languages video, right? Have you found any other analogies from the love languages video? I'm not sure about the love languages one, but how to stop masking when appropriate. That's a really good question. There are a couple of tips to this. My general philosophy with this is that unmasking starts with yourself. And this sounds kind of counterintuitive, but some people mask to themselves. We all psychologically mask to ourselves all the time. There are parts of me that I'm happy to see and parts of me that I would rather not see. So if I just focus on the parts of me that I like and ignore the parts of me that I don't like, that's kind of a form of masking. And the parts of me that I like, it's likely that that's very informed by the culture around me. So maybe the part of me that I don't like talks too much. Where did that come from? It probably came from people around me telling me I talk too much and me wanting to fit in, and therefore me hating the part of me that talks too much. So how to mask less in an appropriate setting? The most appropriate setting, the safest setting to unmask is with yourself. So that looks like practicing self-acceptance. It looks like noticing the parts of me that I don't really like that much. And instead of trying to change them directly, because you can, change yourself and evolve and grow and all that kind of stuff, which is great. But the first step is to just accept that right now, this is a part of me, which means I don't have to fight it all the time. I don't have to fight the urge to talk too much all the time, right? That's a type of masking. Another approach is to do a bit of a safety check. What that looks like is number one, recognizing what am I doing as a mask? What am I afraid of? Like, am I afraid people are going to reject me? Am I afraid people are going to think I'm weird? Am I afraid someone's going to tell me I'm talking too much? Like, what do I actually think is going to happen in this situation? And just do a sanity check of how likely that is to happen. An important thing that I've learned in this process is this is just me in random advice mode, do not say it's not going to happen. Do not say this is impossible. Of course, that would never happen. Because probably there is a small chance. It's just a small chance. So I personally find it more helpful to say, okay, I'm worried that people are going to think I'm weird and stop talking to me forever. And instead of saying that will never happen, say to myself, there is a fairly low chance of that happening. What are all the reasons? What's all the evidence that's coming into that? Well, I've known this friend for 5 years. They're not going to just turn their back on me right now. I know myself. I know I've got a relatively good social awareness of what's appropriate. And I know that I'm only stepping out of that by a little bit. And I can use all of these as much objective evidence as I can to do a sanity check on the process. And then I'm just sharing my own personal process. So hopefully it's helpful. If it's helpful, take it. If it's not helpful, don't take it. Then I break it up into two sections. One is the true part of the message, and one is the not true part of the message. And why I break that up is because usually there will be both. Usually a message that I tell myself, something like, everyone's going to hate you if you do this, part of it will be true, even if it's a tiny, tiny, tiny part. And then part of it will be, or the other way around, part of it will be wrong, even if it's a tiny, tiny part. And part of it will always be true, even if it sounds a bit silly. And that way I can accept the part of it that's true and say, great, thank you for that message. I want to be aware of the small risk in this situation, and also reject the part that's not true. It's only a small risk. It's not a likely scenario. I need to treat it objectively like a small risk. I hope this is making sense. So what that does in the safety check, it's just a reality check. How necessary is it for me to mask? And if the answer is actually it's pretty safe right now, then I know that it's appropriate. I don't need to worry, is it appropriate, is it not appropriate? Because I've done that step already. I've decided that it's safe. Great. Next step, what does masking less look like? The only way to answer this is to recognize what the masking behavior was. Actually, no, I take it back. I disagree with myself. Do you ever do that where you say a sentence or an opinion, and 3/4 of the way through saying it, you disagree with yourself and you end up arguing with yourself and going on a tangent instead of continuing the question? I do remember what I was going to say. I'm trying to trick myself into remembering what I was going to say. I think I was going to say, no, now I've actually legitimately forgotten what I was going to say. No, I was going to say that when I've done the safety step, no, it's gone. Oh, well. It will definitely come back. Unfortunately, trying to bring it back doesn't bring it back. It just makes it harder to come back. Relaxing. Okay, there were two ways. It just came back. 2 ways to mask less. One way to mask less is to not do anything at all. Just be in the situation and ask yourself the question, what do I feel like? Do I feel like eating? Do I feel like talking? Do I feel like standing up? Do I feel like being here? Do I feel like leaving? Do I feel like going over there? Do I feel like talking to the wall? Do I feel like burying my head in my hands or stimming? Or like, what do I feel like? And there's a lot to this, but I'll share a brief version. Once you've identified what you feel like, you can then decide, am I going to just notice it? Am I going to act on it? Am I going to tell someone else what I feel like? So that's one way to mask less. And the other way to mask less is to become aware from your own behavior of what is it that I do that is masking. So maybe masking is a social script where I'm asked a question and I just respond immediately without thinking. Or maybe masking is sitting still. Or maybe masking is looking people in the eye. Or maybe masking is speaking more, or trying to be more confident, or trying to jump in and say something even when I don't really have anything to say. So in that version of it, when you've identified what is the masking behavior, you can consciously just notice when you do it and try and do it slightly less. Okay, I need a tiny break. I'm glad we got there. Thank you, brain. Here's an interesting question. Is it common to start masking early in life when starting school? Short answer, yes. It's masking comes about, if I had to guess developmentally, I would say masking comes about the same time as social awareness. So very young children have very, very little social awareness, but as soon as you're starting to get a sense of how others are responding to you, that's when masking is likely to start. So that's going to look like, especially people who don't know you. So that's going to look like daycare or school or other, probably school is a really big one. Though I would not rule out the fact, I would not rule out significant masking behaviors developing even before that. But yeah, definitely things like school, things like work, especially large groups. in your family, if people know you really well and you've always done a certain thing and that thing has been more or less accepted by that small group of people, you're less likely to mask that behavior. Whereas if there's something that you've always been told off for, like talking too much or not sitting still or other things like that, as we get more and more emotional regulation as we get older, well, as we grow up, not necessarily older, it's more likely that you'll try to inhibit those behaviors if you've had negative reactions, even from like close family and things like that. So that's why it's really common to mask even to yourself. Like I was saying before, it's not just a masking to strangers. People can mask to their spouse. People can mask to themselves. And this concept of unconscious masking is really interesting and difficult. It raises a very challenging personal development kind of question, like, who am I? If I am masking for myself, who am I under the mask? And what would it even look like to take off the mask for myself? That is, how can I be myself if I don't even know who I am? How can I not know who I am if I'm the person being myself? Right? Kind of complex, but actually when you experience it, it's a really legitimate question. And I would highly recommend giving it some thought. If you're feeling like something is off, ask yourself the question, like, who would I be? What would I do if there were literally no constraints on me whatsoever, including constraints of my own judgment? Okay, another question from the chat. If I don't mask at work, I could suffer losses. That's really sad, but any tips? Yes. Firstly, tip number 1, trust your instinct. Tip number 2, develop your instinct so that you can trust it more. And what that looks like is doing that safety check so that your masking is something that you're doing deliberately in a situation. It might be, let's say you're in a situation where it would be unsafe to tell people at work that you play D&D on the weekends, right? If that's the case, then it's a good idea to avoid that unsafe situation. If alternatively, you trust your instinct that it's going to be okay to share this personal thing about myself, then unmasking would look like being more free to do that. So if you're aware of why you're masking, you can also potentially try and find alternate solutions to achieve the same thing. For example, I'm masking because I want other people to see me as competent at work because that's really important. Okay. Is there a way for me to be more authentically myself and ensure that other people at work see me as competent or even more competent, right? So we're kind of separating out the things. If masking has a utility, then we can identify what that utility is and try and make sure we still achieve that while masking less. And so that involves a lot of social awareness, and it is possible to increase that. Okay. Okay, just another one from Eleanor DeHalla Werewolf Queen. Just saying thank you again. So I thought I'd share that. Thanks for all your support every week. It's really nice. I'm glad you could join us for a bit. Okay. Interesting question from Johnny. Do neurotypicals also mask? Yes, but. My answer to this would be yes, but. In a sense, it depends how you define masking, actually. It depends how you define masking. Because masking is a certain set of behaviors that have crossed the threshold from an everyday set of doing these things to it's now a problem and it could actually seriously harm me if I'm not careful. So do neurotypicals also mask? It depends how you view masking, because you could say, yes, everyone masks. Maybe masking is on a scale from 0 to 100. And you could say everyone is somewhere between like 90% of people, all the neurotypicals are somewhere between sort of 5 and 15% masking. Great. But what if the threshold of healthy masking is 20% or 25%, right? If you're masking more than 20% of your personality, then it starts to become pervasive. It starts to become not just masking for the meeting at work, but masking all day at work and all day at home and every day at school and with my family and with my spouse, and even sort of tricking myself into thinking I'm someone who I'm not. So in that sense, maybe. And the difference, as I was saying before, is how much you do it, and if you can find a way for it to actually work for you. Okay, so where to now? I had a thought, and I'm going to start talking, and hopefully the thought will come back to me. I'm in the middle of writing the self-awareness chapter of my book. And I thought there was something relevant about that. Probably the most relevant part is that when we are attempting the whole masking, unmasking process, developing our own self-awareness is absolutely key to the whole process working. So remember earlier when I said there were 2 ways to try and mask less. One is become aware of how I'm masking and deliberately stop that. And the other one is just say all bets are off. I'm not even thinking about anything. I'm just noticing what I want to do right now, how I'm feeling right now. Now, both of those things are self-awareness skills. So the first one is self-awareness in the sense of I am aware of my current behavior. I'm aware of my patterns. I know that when I go into this meeting, I'm going to keep talking because I'm nervous. That's that kind of self-awareness. And the other type of self-awareness is, can I check in with myself? Can I sit here and notice what feels good and what doesn't feel good, and notice I am drawn to this or I'm drawn away from this? Have I had enough? Do I want to go home? Do I really want to stay? Do I want to talk to this person? Do I want to politely end this conversation and find someone more interesting to talk to? All of those things are essentially self-awareness skills. And just like, just like Samson mentioned in the chat, this is a lot like mindfulness. And I do mention this in my book. I actually wrote a blog article. Actually, I think you can now find that blog article on the blog section of the Autism from the Inside website. I wrote a blog article called Mindfulness is the First Step Towards Emotional Intelligence, something like that. I wrote it several years ago. And the basic premise is that, well, number one, self-awareness is the foundational skill of all emotional intelligence. And number two, one of the best ways to start developing self-awareness is a version of a mindfulness practice where you're literally just noticing as much as you can without judging as much as you can. So the goal is to notice, and if you notice that you're judging, that's great, because the goal is to notice. So that is not even going to try and finish that sentence. You probably already understand. Another interesting part of unmasking is when you are going to get an official autism assessment. How do I've had lots of coaching clients as well come to me with this specific question. Like, I want to know myself enough that I can unmask enough in the throughout the diagnosis process. Otherwise, it's going to be a very, very expensive waste of time to go through a diagnosis process, mask perfectly, and be told that I'm not autistic because my masking skills are too good. So, with that in mind, it's around, number one, like I said before, recognizing what you currently do that is masking, and getting an understanding of when it happens and why it happens, so that like the ultimate level of this is so that I can explain my masking behavior to others. It might sound something like, if I'm talking a lot, it's because I'm nervous. Or it might sound something like, I look really composed right now, but this is one slither of me that you see. And if you could see how I function at home, you would see a completely different side of me. And then you might list some of the things that you do in these other spaces, you know. And so that's kind of a way of decompartmentalizing your life. So if someone only sees the mask, even if I can't drop the mask in front of that person, if I understand my mask at an intellectual level enough, and knowing how it works, I can at least try to describe what I'm like under the mask. It's not quite as good as dropping the mask, but it's a good step, because if I can successfully describe it to the other person, they can start looking for the evidence themselves. So with my words, for example, I often tell people most of the time I can string a sentence together. Most of the time my brain just does it automatically and I can speak fine and everyone's happy. Sometimes it just stops and I just can't think of the next word. I'm reminded of the Simpsons quote, like, what's that metal dilly you use to dig food? Right? That's how my brain works sometimes. And now when I tell people that, they've been primed to look for that in my speech. And instead of thinking, oh, he must just be thinking, or he must just be distracted, they'll be noticing, oh, sometimes Paul gets to 3/4 of the way through the sentence and just can't find the next word. And sometimes he seems to be just saying random things that don't really mean anything. And like, yeah, that's a strategy. That's a strategy trying to click my brain into gear so it remembers what I was trying to actually say. So, yeah. So if you can't actually physically take the mask off or lower it to any extent, if we're not going to be so binary about this, then the next best thing is to learn about it yourself and describe it to other people. Okay. How do you know? I think, how do you know you are masking? For me personally, this is again with the self-awareness aspect. For me personally, I have to be aware of my energy and how much am I pushing myself? So if the whole masking concept is a little bit complex, you can radically simplify it to ask the question, how much am I pushing myself in this moment? How much am I putting up with in this moment? This is not that comfortable. These lights are not that great. That noise is a little bit annoying. I really don't want to be talking to this person right now. Have you ever had that social thing where someone's talking to you and you're pretending to like talking to them when they're just saying inane stuff, and you're like, when are you going to stop talking so that I can just relax? So that level of putting energy in can be seen as a type of masking. Imagine a social situation where you don't have to do anything and you can just be yourself and do whatever you feel like. It's relaxing to be around people when you don't need to mask. You can also do this in hindsight. What that looks like is I come home from an event. How do I feel? I get a sudden relaxation that I'm finally home. That's a clue. It must have meant I was spending a significant amount of energy to be at that event. If you're careful to pay attention, there's a difference between relief and tiredness. So an example for me might be I like metal music, as some of you may know, right? And so when I go to a concert, it's really loud. There's lots of energy. There's lots of, like, if you're in a crowd of people, there's a lot of energy just to hold your own space in that crowd. And so 12 hours of that and then coming home, I'm going to be tired, of course. Right? That makes sense. But is it a relief to get out of it? There's a big difference between I had fun and I have spent a lot of energy and now I'm tired versus I was pushing myself and now the weight has been lifted from my shoulders because I don't have to do it anymore. Okay. And this is also an unfortunately common experience. In the past, I figured out I was masking post-meltdown. So in a worst case scenario, if I have no self-awareness of what I'm doing, it's likely that I'm either going to hit a meltdown, or if not a meltdown, then long-term burnout. And it's hard to tell which is worse. Probably the long-term burnout is worse because at least with a meltdown, I mean, it depends on the type and it depends if it's safe to have a meltdown. But assuming I can have a meltdown in a relatively safe space without too many negative ramifications of that, a meltdown can be a really resetting experience where I've been pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing, and my body says, nah, no more. We're going to take control now. We left it to your rational side for too long and you made poor decisions. So emotions taking over and you now no longer have any conscious control of your emotions and your reactions. And after that, if that's gone well and your body's done what it needed to do, sometimes after a meltdown, I can get this feeling of the same feeling of relaxation and of reducing all of that stress because it's all gone and I don't have to do it anymore. And that is actually a really good time to reflect on what was the cause of stress. And the way I do that is I imagine myself going back into a situation. And sometimes I just think, why would I do that? Why? I just don't want to do that. I want to sit here peacefully. Why would I want to go into that space? And the answer is, well, maybe you don't want to go into that space. Maybe going into that space requires a lot of energy, requires you to mask, requires you to push yourself. Okay. So I'm thinking we might wrap up pretty soon, unless people have too many, unless there are some more questions in the chat. I realize this has been, I've tried not to be too prescriptive with this. Like, it's not a webinar, it's not a course, it's not like delivering this kind of content. It was supposed to be a Q&A. So we've gone over a couple of things like the overcompensating, like the camouflaging, like the strategies for unmasking with yourself first, and then slowly discovering what's safe and moving that out to other people. So there's a lot more to those things. But I thought for today, let's try and keep it as light as possible to answer your burning questions. So let me have a quick look through the chat again to see if there's anything else jumping out at me. Have you heard about adrenaline shakes after social situations? That's not something I've specifically heard of. It sounds a lot like stress. It sounds similar to the meltdown thing that I was talking about earlier. Yeah, sometimes if you push yourself, your body says no after a while. How do you relate with others who are diagnosed with autism? Okay, I'm not sure what that question is, but it made a thought for me, which is a great way to learn how to unmask is to meet other autistic people, hear how they mask. A great way of learning how you mask is hearing how other people mask and asking yourself the question, oh, do I do that? Nah, maybe. Actually, maybe I do that a little bit. It's probably not me, but it might be me a little bit. And if you listen to enough people's experiences, then you'll get 5% from this person, 1% from this person, 20% from this person. Yeah, wow, I definitely do that. And it kind of gets you thinking into the right way of just being able to notice the behavior in yourself. Like, oh, I didn't realize that talking too much could be masking. Oh, I didn't realize that sitting still could be a form of masking if I feel like moving and I don't move, that kind of thing. I didn't realize giving someone eye contact could be masking. And the other thing is that being around other autistic people and witnessing what it's like for other people to drop the mask is a really powerful experience. Being in an all autistic space is an experience of itself, and it's very hard to mask in that space because there's nothing to mask to, and everyone else is doing weird stuff. And there's the implicit invitation that I can just do whatever I need to. I can sit on the floor. I can stim. I can just stare at a wall. Everything is fine in this space. So maybe I'll leave it on that note. I always like leaving on the note that a great way to understand autism, a great way to understand yourself, a great way to learn about masking and unmasking is to meet other autistic people and hear from a wide range of voices. So definitely recommend that. Hopefully, yeah. So I'll leave it there. If my voice can figure out how to say goodbye, I will say goodbye in the next 30 seconds. That's an accountability partner for myself. If I tell myself I'll say goodbye in the next 30 seconds, then I have to do it. So thanks again for everyone contributing in the chat, in the live chat, and all the Patreon supporters and everyone who joined our social this morning and all of that. Hope you enjoyed this live. If you have suggestions on topics for future lives, I'd like to do them relatively frequently, like maybe once a month or so, then let me know. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I will see you another time. What am I doing? I am clicking this button. Bye-bye.